I want to show our viewers a video we made, which explains the history of the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, and how the international community, the United Nations, and basically every country that has a diplomatic relations with China, including the United States, recognize Taiwan as part of China. So take a look.
After China's Civil War, the Republic of China, or ROC, was exiled to Taiwan in 1949. The same year, the People's Republic of China, PRC, was founded. In 1971, the UN voted to welcome the PRC as the only legitimate government of China. The ROC was no longer recognized. The historic change paved the foundation for the three joint communiques, which would ensure the bilateral relations between China and the US. The first joint communique was signed in 1972. In the document, the U.S. acknowledged that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there's only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. The second joint communique was published in 1978, which formally announced the commencement of normal relations between Washington and Beijing. In the document, the U.S. affirmed that the PRC was the legitimate government of China. The third joint communique was issued in 1982 when the U.S. stated that it did not seek a long-term policy of arms sales to Taiwan. Citing these agreements, Beijing has repeatedly said that the so-called official exchanges with Taiwan is not acceptable. When President Xi Jinping spoke with President Joe Biden on July 28th, President Xi emphasized that the historical ins and outs of the Taiwan question are crystal clear. He said the U.S. should honor the One China principle and implement the three joint communiques both in word and in deed.
The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other and to establish diplomatic relations as of January the 1st, 1979. The United States recognizes the government of the People's Republic of China as a sole legal government of China. Within this context, the people of the United States will maintain cultural, commercial, and other unofficial relations with the people of Taiwan. The government of the United States of America acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China, and Taiwan is part of China.
181 countries have now established diplomatic relations with the PRC. All of them acknowledge the One China principle and promise to handle the relations with Taiwan within the One China framework.
Yep. So this is the fact that most Western mainstream media don't mention. They constantly play the word game in their coverage, trying to create an illusion for audiences outside of China, making them believe that China and Taiwan are two different things, even though their government officially recognized that there's only one China and Taiwan is part of China. By the way, I'm just curious because you are from Taiwan and you also lived in the United States, and you strongly support their peaceful reunification. How come? Because I think many Westerners probably will be puzzled at this. Like, how come you lived in the United States, enjoy the true democracy and freedom, and you still support China? What? So what are you going to say?
I will explain why I think the way I do, and also explain why the average person in Taiwan thinks the way they do. So this will have to go into a little bit of family history, if you don't mind me making like a 5-minute detour.
Sure, go on.
Okay.
We got time.
The Taiwanese person in my family is my mother, and she is what we call 本省人, or local Taiwanese, meaning somebody whose family has been in Taiwan since the Qing dynasty at the latest. And she is 6th generation Taiwanese. Her ancestors came from Zhangzhou and Fujian province. And in the US, most of my parents' friends are actually 外省人, or extra-provincial people, meaning those whose families arrived in Taiwan sometime between 1945 and the mid-1950s, mostly in 1949. And my father is technically a 外省人, but he is also pretty atypical because he was born to a Chinese father in South Korea. And back then, the South Korean government did not recognize the children of foreigners as their citizens. And the Chinese government that they had diplomatic ties with back then was the one in Taipei, not the one in Beijing. And back then, the KMT was also trying hard to win over overseas Chinese So he was born a Chinese citizen of the so-called Republic of China and attended a school for overseas Chinese in Seoul. So I bring this up because people from these different backgrounds in Taiwan tend to have different politics. And although I didn't understand all of the details growing up, this is something I noticed. And that being said, it wasn't until the 2000s that the curriculum in Taiwan was changed in a top-down fashion so that children weren't being taught that they're Chinese. So I remember how in the 1990s, everyone in Taiwan called themselves Chinese and saw being Taiwanese as a regional identity. And even in the 2000s, this change was pretty gradual. So it was always something I wanted to make sense of, especially as someone who was taught by my parents that I'm Chinese. And a huge part of my identity was being Chinese. And I never saw being Taiwanese as an antithesis of being Chinese. So I took it upon myself to really study as much of the relevant history as I could, since it seemed like even in Taiwan, there was all generations. And needless to say, Taiwan's had a very turbulent history. The people here have gone through a lot over the past centuries, especially beginning in 1895, which marked the beginning of the initial 50 years of separation from the mainland due to Japanese colonization. And although Taiwan was returned to China in 1945, the Civil War meant that the two sides would be unfortunately separated again. And although both the CPC and the KMT understood the two sides of the strait to be a single country, and they disagreed over who was the rightful representative of China. Then came the anti-CPC sentiments that began with Chiang Kai-shek's propaganda, but also the mishandling of internal contradictions by the KMT, which unfortunately eventually led to a liberal opposition that brewed anti-mainlander sentiments here. And because due to martial law, the elections at the higher level were suspended. And since the KMT arrived to Taiwan from the mainland, everyone in the higher levels of power was a mainlander. So mainlander became associated with KMT. And what they later did was the opportunists were basically like, remember the worst of the KMT? The CPC is the red version of that. But I recognize that the vast majority of 外省人 or the mainlanders in Taiwan were just normal working people who loved both their hometowns on the mainland as well as Taiwan, and that most local Taiwanese are also just hardworking people who want better futures for themselves and their families. And it became clear to me early on that within Taiwan, you had opportunists creating rifts between the different groups of people in Taiwan for their own benefit. It's like a divide and conquer. And unfortunately, you see that happening between Taiwan and the mainland today. So I'm almost done. Clearly, there are many layers of contradictions on this island. And unfortunately, there is a global superpower on the other side of the Pacific that's willing to take advantage of all of these contradictions to advance its foreign policy goals at the expense of Chinese people on both sides of the strait. So the more I understood US imperialism, the more I realized how much honest people in Taiwan are manipulated by the US State Department and the Western elite through media, NGOs, education, the local political pawns of Washington, D.C. And these are the same people who lied to the American people about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq or the use of chemical weapons by Assad in Syria. And I think I am fortunate in that I can read both Chinese and English. So being able to access information that both the average person in Taiwan or the average person in the US can access does provide me with a more unique worldview. The thing is, a lot of Taiwanese people understand the West through what the media here tells them. But the local media here is essentially a Chinese translation of Western media. You can look at who owns the media here, like a bunch of Western investment funds and all of that. Most people here don't have the experience of growing up in the US and seeing it for what it really is, though. So nor do many study the history of US foreign policy in depth to realize that the US government is not a friend of even the people in the US, but instead see it as the protector of democracy and human rights. So I put a lot of thought into what independence and sovereignty mean. And I find that what the Taiwan separatists are fighting for is anything but independence or sovereignty, but rather a deeper integration into the US empire. And this is ridiculous, especially in this day and age when the unipolar world order is dying and the multipolar world order is being born. And when we're being told that being Taiwanese means rejecting our Chinese identity, to me, that means it's erasing the meaning of what it means to be Taiwanese and the forced adoption of this bourgeois liberal cosmopolitanism, where traditional cultures are erased and replaced with an artificial culture that may on the surface seem to celebrate diverse cultures, but at the end of the day exists to facilitate Western hegemony. And both mainland China and Taiwan are what they are today because of the hard work on people of the both sides of the strait. Taiwan was built up by generations of migrants from the mainland alongside the indigenous peoples for centuries. And ever since the mainland reformed and opened up, people from Taiwan have made many contributions over the past decades. China belongs to the Chinese people, and that means both mainland China and Taiwan both belong to the people on both sides of the strait. So that's why I support peaceful reunification, because I am a Chinese patriot, because I wish for the Taiwanese people to live as dignified people of a great country with a bright future, instead of living as neocolonial subjects of a dying U.S. empire. I do not wish for the fruits of generations of hard work to go to waste for the benefit of a small clique of political opportunists and their U.S. imperialist overlords. So my conclusion is we should not place trust in the U.S. government when the U.S. government fails to provide even for its own people.
So let me show you what China actually said. Take a look at this. Taiwan is China's Taiwan. Resolving the Taiwan question is a matter for the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by the Chinese. We will continue to strive for peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and the utmost effort, but we will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all measures necessary. This is directed solely at interference by outside forces and the few separatists seeking Taiwan independence and their separatist activities. It is by no means targeted at our Taiwan compatriots. And it continues. Blood runs thicker than water. The fellow Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits are one family bound by blood. We have always shown respect and care for our Taiwan compatriots and work to deliver benefits to them. We will continue to promote economic and cultural exchanges and cooperations across the straits, advance our integrated development in all fields, and improve systems and policies that contribute to the well-being of our Taiwan compatriots. Complete reunification of our country must be realized, and it can, without a doubt, be realized. So this is from the work report delivered to the 20th Party Congress in October 2022, but it's also the same stance that China has been repeatedly saying, but just as many Western media don't really report the full statement.